The waters will be rough. Have faith and you will make it all the way up. 'Cause the journey
16 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, today we're joined by the President General of the Contractors and General Workers Union, Ermine DeBique, to talk about what's went on with the initial discussions with the Chief Personnel Officer, Commander Dr. Daryl Dindial, on salary negotiations. Remember, this was telegraphed by the government a few weeks ago, that instructions were given by the Finance Minister for these discussions to begin. The CPO met with the Contractors and General Workers Trade Union, the NUGFW, and the Amalgamated Workers Union at the Personnel Officers Department in Sinclair. Today we'll discuss how those discussions went and how the union feels going forward. Mr. DeBique, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. What's your initial reaction to the discussions yesterday? Good morning to you.
And good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Our initial reaction to what was presented to us was that, firstly, that we would have submitted proposals as it relates to what we were looking for the 2014-2016 period and the 2017-2019 period. We would have met initially with the CPO, and he would have given us some guidelines. And we would have then submitted another set of proposals. And we were really looking forward to the CPO, Mr. Dindial, submitting counter proposals. But this did not happen. But we met yesterday, and we would have gone through, because he would have indicated to the three unions that firstly he would like to deal with or discuss the allowances and premiums for the workers before he have discussions as it relates to the cost of living and salary increases. So yesterday we met, we sat, and he would have presented as it relates to the allowances and premium for the workers of the three different unions. What was told to us is that certain allowances and premiums, it is looking favorable in getting increases. But other premiums and allowances, they are not sure if they will be able to increase those allowances and premiums as it relates to the two past period.
So Mr. DeBique, just so we could understand it, you all had presented proposals in advance of this meeting. And
yes.
And essentially, the CPO said he ain't really there to discuss that. He wanted to discuss something else. Is that correct?
All unions submit proposals for the 2014-2016 period and 2017-2019 period. When we met as a grouping, and I must say that this is the first time that the CPO himself is meeting with the daily paid unions. And he would have indicated, we would have submitted proposals for those periods. And the CPO did not submit counter proposals to the three unions. When we met, he indicated that the government is under constraints, and therefore he would have guided us in a certain direction as it relates to allowances and premiums, and indicated to us that we must go back and review our proposals as it relates to the allowances and premium. Back.
Okay, I hear you on that, Mr. DeBique, but are you all happy to be guided in that direction? Because that sounds like 0-0-0.
Well, I would not say it looked like 0-0-0, because we really have to be optimistic as it relates, because we represent workers. And when we go around the table, to negotiate and to find the best terms and conditions as it relates to the workers that we represent.
I hear you on that, but if it is that it's obviously Mr. Dindial, or Commander Dr. Daryl Dindial, to give him his full title for whatever it means, if you all went with a certain expectation and he directed you all in a different direction, isn't the writing on the wall there?
Well, it is not customary that when we submit proposals that the CPO will inform us that they are not prepared to look in certain areas. So this is a new scenario that is taking place. But we are prepared because we represent workers, and we are prepared to sit and speak with the CPO to get the best for the workers.
And were you given a date for another meeting?
Yes, another meeting is scheduled for the 12th of May, and he indicated yesterday on the 12th of May, he would indicate to us what he intends to propose as it relates to cost of living and salary increases. But we would have done a snapshot calculation as it relates to COLA, because presently the daily paid workers are being paid $9 per day COLA, cost of living. And normally that cost of living will be consolidated to your base salary, and then it will become a new salary, and then the percentage is placed on it. So what the CPO would have indicated to us that it seems he is looking to go that way, that he would not be able to pay or to consolidate the COLA. And we would have told him if we would have done negotiations for the 2 period and consolidated the COLA, it would have been roughly around $14,040 for each worker in the consolidation of COLA, of the $9 COLA. So therefore, if we are looking to negotiate, we would like something around that area, and take it into consideration that we would have had workers who would have retired, and they are looking forward for the difference because they would have gotten their package already, but they would have worked during this period. And we got to be very mindful, and in our negotiations, we have to keep that behind our head, because these workers would be looking forward to something as it relates to negotiation for that period.
And Mr. DeBique, what was your feeling after the meeting, coming out of that meeting? And obviously there would have been expectations, and your colleagues from the other unions, the NUGFW, Amalgamated Workers, of course, a sense of expectation maybe going into the meeting, because we're talking about bargaining periods, 2014, 2016, 2017, 2019, those times have long gone. We've seen costs going upwards and so on. Coming out of that meeting, what is your feeling? What was your feeling coming out of that meeting, as far as optimistic, disappointed? What's your feeling?
We were disappointed because we represent workers, and workers were aware that we were meeting with the CPO. So workers will be looking forward to some sort of results, their leaders coming out telling them something. So we was a bit disappointed that the CPO was not able to speak to COLA and the percentage, because the workers were looking forward to the union coming today to address them as it relates to COLA and the percentage, because we indicated to the CPO that we really wanted to discuss COLA and the percentage, because that is going to affect each worker. The allowances and premiums, some workers would be entitled and some workers would not be entitled. So as a responsible trade unionist, presidents of all the unions, we indicated that we were looking at what is going to affect the whole of the union, our membership. And we pleaded with the CPO as it relates to having discussions with COLA and the percentage, but he indicated and he started firm with his decision that we have to wait until the 12th of May, whereby he would give us some sort of information as it relates to the COLA and the percentage wage increase.
And therefore, in preparing for that meeting in 13 days' time, which is going to be on Thursday, May the 12th, as you mentioned, going into that now being a bit clearer as to what is the perspective of the CPO as the representative of the Ministry of Finance, because of course, as we know, he will only be guided by what is authorized by the Ministry of Finance. Are you hopeful that you could get better news in 2 weeks' time?
We are very much hopeful. We have to be hopeful because we represent workers, and workers are looking forward to us putting forward our best negotiation skills to come back to give them a news that might not be to the best interest, but as best as possible, taking into consideration what is taking place globally. And so we are hopeful, but we are not going to sit down and roll over as it relates to whatever the CPO placed on the table. The CPO have to place something good, and as we indicated to him, the calculation for the 6-year period for the COLA, which is customary, right, being consolidated, is $14,040. So they must look at that figure. So whatever is being presented in whatever form must be around that area. So if he does not come with something that would represent close to that area, it will be very disappointing to us as leaders, and for us going back to our membership to tell them this is what the CPO has placed on the table.
You know, Ms. DeBique, I'm just wondering in your own mind, because it kind of took us by surprise as a nation when we got that announcement that the Ministry of Finance has authorized the CPO to initiate negotiations. That came, just about a month ago to start those discussions. And it occurred to us that, wait now, local government elections coming up. So is it that they intend to take you all for a ride in the way that they took the OWTU for a ride with Patriotic Energies and getting the Petrotrin refinery, which as it turned out was an excellent election strategy for the 2020 general election? So in the same way that the OWTU became the PNM's bubbly for 2020, are you all going to be their bubbly for local government 2022?
We would not be the People's National Movement bubbly at all times. We take into consideration we are the representative of the workers, and anytime we go around the table, we intend to negotiate a package that is reasonable, taking into consideration the 6 years that has passed. We would be looking at that, and we are not prepared to accept anything that is unreasonable to present to our workers.
And Ms. DeBique, if the CPO says, look, I can't give you what I don't have, I can't basically...
We also would like to inform our workers that they need to rally around their union, because this negotiation is not a normal negotiation. This negotiation has 2 past periods, and we are into the last period, so they need to give their union all the support that is required, and to come out on the 30th of April, which is this Saturday, where the trade unions is celebrating May Day in San Fernando. Come out and support your union, because your union is as strong as its members.
And the event that's happening tomorrow, as you said, in San Fernando, where is it going to be happening and at what time?
Okay, we assemble at OWTU Circular Road at 9 a.m., whereby the presidents of all unions would address the workers. After each president have addressed the workers, we will now leave Circular Road and we would proceed along Royal Road onto Coffee Street. We go down Coffee Street onto Lodge Street. We turn onto Mukarapa Street, onto Sutton Street. We turn right onto Sipera Street. We turn right onto Rushford Street. Then we turn right onto Independence Avenue. We go straight up and we end on Harris Promenade, where Ansel Roger, the president of DRETAM, would address the workers.
And by the way, I should mention, I precluded our discussion that we're having with Trevor Johnson at the start of the second hour, where we'll get more detail on what's happening tomorrow. But in the time that we have available, Ms. DeBique, how would you respond to those who will say, look, we understand that these are bargaining periods that have long since passed. I mean, workers still operating on 2013 salaries. but times are so tight and so difficult, not just for workers, but for the government as far as revenue and resources and so on. And therefore, you have to cut your cloth to suit the realities, and therefore you can't really expect too much from the CPO in these negotiations.
Fazeer, what is too much for workers? Taking into consideration, utility bills has gone up, food has gone up, transportation has gone up, and the workers are still working on 2013 salary. So we would not say that we are looking forward for too much. We are looking forward for the CPO presenting something that will take care of that past period and taking into consideration all that the workers have to endure. Because we know other areas are just waiting to carry up their prices, and it would be very unfair to the working class who has not received an increase since 2013. We are prepared to struggle and to ensure that what the workers are entitled to, that they get what they're entitled to.
And just as a final thought, are you mindful, and we've had these sort of experiences before, I recall 2009, around that time, and again there was an election period and it became very political and so on. Are you mindful that, of course, the government will be aware that whatever happens in these negotiations could be seen as a precedent for any further discussions, and therefore it could be a situation where you all are the testing ground for any discussions moving forward, and therefore they might want to set the bar very, very low rather than set it high, because then they'll have to meet that expectation for everybody else, Ms. DeBique.
I heard you, Fazeer, but as I indicated before, we represent workers, and when we sit around the table, we take into consideration all the increases that these workers would have had to endure. And in fact, because of this situation, I need to state that it would have caused breakup in marriages, homes would have been divided, and all these things we have to consider when we sit around the table to make that final decision with whatever the CPO is placing before us.
And will there...
We have at all times take into consideration what is best for our members.
And Ms. DeBique, just as a final question, will there be any meeting between yourself and the other union heads who were at that meeting yesterday? Will there be any meeting in advance of that meeting on May the 12th? Will you all be getting together to come up with some maybe unified proposal? Does that happen at all?
Fazeer, I did not hear what you said.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you hearing me now?
Yes,
okay,
I'm hearing
so
you now.
I'm sorry about that. Something must have dropped off briefly, but just very quickly, will you and your other union colleagues who were at the meeting yesterday, will you all be meeting in advance of that meeting on May the 12th? Does it happen that way?
Of course, we would have met on the 2 occasions the day before, and we would have held discussions. So going into that meeting, we would have been on the same page, if I can use that word. And yes, we would be meeting before we go into that meeting on the 12th, because we have to brainstorm whatever it is that the CPO would present and how it would affect our members and what is best for our members at all times,
Ermine DeBique, President General of the Contractors and General Workers Union, we want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to be with us this morning. Really appreciate it.
And thank you very much, Fazeer.
You're more than welcome. 6:35 in Trinidad and Tobago. It's now time to remind you of the COVID-19 protocols. Wear a mask over the nose and mouth when you go out in public, because it is still the law. Keep your distance from others 6 feet or 2 meters. Stay home if you're ill. Wash your hands often with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Cough into a tissue into the crook of your elbow. Avoid touching your face. Sanitize those hard surfaces, tabletops, handrails, doorknobs, trolleys and cell phones as often as possible. We'll be back right after this.
You must fight, 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 fight. Fight with all your might. stand up to your trial.